we're here with Simon Stiles. Simon is the tubist of the Tonhalle Orchestra.
Good afternoon.
He has one of his smaller tubas. Believe it or not, there are many, many sizes of tuba. Why don't you tell us, when did the tuba first come into the orchestra?
Well, the tuba was invented, not developed from previous historical instruments, but actually invented in about 1825. And that was all to do with the Industrial Revolution, strangely enough, where mechanically people were finally able to make machine parts with fine enough tolerances that they would be airtight, so hence valves were able to be made. Previous to the tuba, there was an instrument called the ophicleide, which looks like a brass bassoon, I suppose, with keys like a bassoon, and an instrument even older than that called the serpent, which looks exactly like the name. A serpent with a number of holes, a wooden leather-bound construction, which were used because there was nothing else available.
Right.
But you see, Beethoven came and he enlarged the orchestra with his deafness and with the start of the Romantic movement from an orchestra of about, let's say, 40 players to an orchestra of probably double the size, and more there was the need for a general orchestral bass in the orchestra. So the instrument was created out of the necessity. The orchestral double basses in the big fortissimos were not able without putting 10 or 12 or 20 on the stage. And you look at Berlioz's scores, he'll ask for 20 double basses. They weren't able to put out the sound in a big full orchestral sound, and that's what my instrument does.
So you needed a brass bass instrument to be loud enough.
It just needed a general bass. It could have been the pedals of the organ, I suppose, theoretically. But the point is, this is not, I don't call it the bass instrument of the brass section. That's the bass trombone.
Okay.
It's the bass of the orchestra. And it's an instrument that does colour very strongly, the orchestral's colour. When I start playing, I think it's generally felt and heard.
Now, which piece are you using this F tuba on?
Well, this afternoon I'm using it for Rienzi because it's high and it's fairly fast. It's got to be quite bright. The larger the instrument, the darker the sound. It's a conical construction. All tubas are conically constructed, whereas trombones and trumpets are cylindrically constructed. That means that a trumpet or a trombone basically keeps its same diameter from front until pretty much the bell, whereas the tuba, like the horns, conically gets bigger and bigger from the moment from here on in. So that gives a darker, rounder sound, which again differentiates it from the trombones. So even if I sit here, it's not just geographical really. But yes, the conical instruments, the bigger they are, the darker they sound. So my general orchestral instrument is a very large C tuba, which was actually built first over 100 years ago, at the very early days of wax recordings, where they were unable to pick up double bass sounds, so what they used was tuba, and they built this tuba to sound like a double bass, but to be able to be picked up on wax cylinders. And so you listen to recordings of, for instance, Chrysler, there's quite clearly a tuba playing and not a double bass. For Mozart, something or other.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, did you decide I'm going to use the F tuba on this part, or does
Absolutely,
Wagner?
yeah,
So Wagner didn't specify this. This is your decision.
Yes and no. I mean, he would not have said it needs to be an F tuba, but his definition was in the early works quite clearly. You have serpent parts, you have ophicleide parts in the very early operas, and Rienzi is one of those. Also, his operas, which were written for France, were written for high tubas, quite definitely. They're quite virtuoso. The later works, The Ring and so on, certainly The Ring, is definitely contrabass tuba, which is then the largest tuba you've got, more or less. A very large conical, even larger than the instrument that I generally use in the orchestra.
This piece, Rienzi, was when Wagner was writing operas according to the conventions of the time, before he'd really developed his radical Wagnerian ideas, which get started with the Flying Dutchman and go on from there.
Quite. Now, it drifts. I mean, you've got chunks that sound like Weber, you've got chunks that sound like Rossini, and you've got chunks that sound actually quite Wagnerian as well at the beginning. But he obviously hadn't found his modus vivendi when he wrote the pop piece, so it's a bit of a potpourri. It's good fun to play though.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece.
Band music, I call it. You just play top left to bottom right, non-stop.
Very exciting piece to hear.
Yes, it is. It's a fun piece, yeah. And it's fun to play.
Now, what about this? Maestro Zinman's been gone for 2 years. What's it like having him back for a
Great.
short time?
Great. I have always loved David. I knew David a very, very long time ago. End of the 1970s, I already knew him when he was the boss of Rotterdam. And so I always wished to have a period of time with David Zinman. I had 20 wonderful years of David as my boss, or nearly 20 years. And it's very much an Auf Wiedersehen. It was a very relaxed atmosphere last week, and it's a very relaxed atmosphere, as you can tell, this week. David is a great teacher, great friend of the orchestra as well, so we're very happy to see him again.
Yeah.